Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is April 17th, 2017, and we are having another episode in our series on conversations with general authorities. We've already done one with Trevor Haugen, and then we've also done one with Lance Miles, which may or may not be released before this one, but today's episode is going to be with the Abhaus. The Abhaus, Jake and Meg, are returning to Mormon Stories. If any of you are hardcore Mormon Stories fans, you'll know that episodes 508 through 510 were about Meg and Jake Abhau and their wonderful, beautiful son, John, and just talking about how they support their gay son and dealing with faith crisis and finding their voice as LGBT allies. It's a great episode. It's on video. I think my cousin Daniel Parkinson recorded it, and it's worth checking out. But we have Jake and Meg returning to Mormon Stories because they have a story to tell us about a meeting they had with a general authority. And the name of that general authority is D. Todd Christofferson. And before we dive into the interview, I'll just I want to kind of state my intention up front, and then Meg and Jake, you guys can add to it. The thing that I just wanted to say is, our intent here is to, within the church, we're obviously a patriarchy, and within this patriarchy, first presidency members, apostles, and general authorities rule the organization. And it is widely known within Mormonism and sort of culturally, absolutely an expectation that these general authorities have special relationships with the divine. And so not only are they leaders, but they're viewed as not only ecclesiastical leaders, bureaucratic leaders, but they also are viewed as spiritual leaders. And so, but unfortunately, they're rarely on the record. They don't do a lot of meetings with media or the press. They don't go off script. You may hear from them at a stake conference or general conference, but you don't get to hear from them to kind of gather the information you might need to live your life. And so we think it's important to kind of just have this open discussion about why general authorities, what do they say, what do they know, how powerful or not powerful are they, how knowledgeable versus not knowledgeable are they, how helpful are they versus not helpful, until they're willing to kind of be a little bit more open and transparent in their thoughts, their beliefs, their policies, their advice, etc. So this is not to throw anyone, including D. Todd Christofferson, under the bus. My guess is everybody loves the guy. But it is to shine more light into Mormonism and to give more transparency. Now, Meg and Jake, what would you guys add or take away from that opener as it relates to your intentions for doing this interview?
Well, I think you just said it right there at the end, is transparency. I mean, ultimately, for me personally, my probably biggest undoing with the church was the lack of transparency once you start, turning over stones and learning more and more. And as we'll talk about a little bit, we had some conversations in our meeting that I was like, oh my gosh, I wish this was said to the general public, or to the masses. And so for 3 or 4 years, we kind of talked about it in very, very small private circles. But he said so much that could make some major, major change if only it was out there in public. And I wish there was more transparency in the church. And so for me, that's kind of why I'm here.
I was a little nervous, and I kept going flip-flopping whether to talk about it in public or not. Just a little nervous, just to respect my relationship with my friend Tom, his brother, but I think it is an important conversation to have. I think there should be more transparency, especially with people who have such influence in the LGBT community specifically. So I hope my motivations are pure, and I hope that it's helpful and useful to some people.
Beautiful. Okay. So we released the interview with you guys on Mormon Stories back in November 2014, but why don't you guys give just like a 1 or 2 minute recap of your story, or however much you think is useful. Give a recap of your story to just kind of catch people up to the date and time. When was the actual meeting? Do you guys know the approximate date of the meeting with D. Todd?
Yeah.
It was September 2013. It was right before affirmation that year. It was our first affirmation that we had ever attended.
Was
So
that what Barb and Steve Young, were they at that one? Was that the Barb and Steve Young? Okay, I was there with you guys.
Yeah. And John had come out. Our John had come out in March of earlier that year. So it's in that same first year.
Okay.
And prior to that, a month before that, we were, as it says, TBM, all in kind of with the church.
Actually, it was the one with Benji Schwimmer.
Mm-hmm.
Barb and Steve were the next year.
No, Barb, they were there too.
Oh, they were?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they were both there. Cool. Okay, so just for the sake of those who, tell us really briefly kind of your story as it led up to 2013.
Do you want me? I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead, Meg.
Yeah,
I was born and raised in the church. I have 10 sisters and 6 brothers, and my parents are converts. They've divorced, so we have a blended family. But yeah, I went inactive a little bit as a teenager, more like teenage angst, not really disbelief. So that was a lot of shame and guilt there. But then I came back and I was all in, and we raised John in the church. It's just basic Mormon family. I mean, I was in Young Women's, and I had every single calling from secretary to Young Women's president and everyone in between. And it was always the running joke of like, if we moved to a ward, how quickly I would be called to Young Women's. I literally could do nothing else. But yeah, I just was just super in. And
was it Arizona? Was it also North Carolina? Where were you guys?
Yeah.
We got married in Bountiful in '98, and then we moved shortly after to North Carolina. Been in Arizona, back to North Carolina. We're back here in Arizona now, but ultimately, yeah, North Carolina was probably the bulk of our church attendance and activity.
And where were we living in 2013?
Yeah, that's where we were when John came out.
In Arizona?
In North Carolina.
Oh, okay, all right. Jake, tell us your background really quick.
Just real brief. I've got one brother, and lost my father to cancer when I was 13, and but one of the last things he wanted me to do was go on a mission. So it was never even really a choice for me. It was just always this thing I was going to do. And probably my biggest thing growing up with the church is I always had that very, very rock solid testimony. And I think it really happened after my dad died. I had, when you're a kid, you have the plan of salvation, and that's the easiest lesson to teach in primary or young men's. But I really, really believed it. All those little, the little cutout things that you stick up on the wall, and as you kind of go through. And it really spoke to my testimony. And after my dad died, I just really strongly believed, and never really doubted up until, not even really at all until kind of had that crack after John came out. But, went on a mission to Montreal, 93 to 95. So, but that's basically in a nutshell.
Okay, cool. So, so just tell us briefly about John growing up and his background leading up to 2013.
I would say John was pretty Peter priesthood.
Yeah.
Like he was really super into church, and never really complained about going ever to any of, I don't know, like he never asked if he could not go to church. He was just he's an only child, and so it's just the 3-pack of us, and so I don't know, it just, we always had open communication, and I think he was pretty typical. But one time this was like maybe a year before he came out, he was 12, and like Mr. Deacon Peter priesthood everything, and somebody was giving a testimony meeting, and they were saying how their mom was so awesome, which made him so awesome, or so their mom held to the iron rod, and that's why I'm so awesome. And that's kind of like what his testimony was about. was like the faith of his mother made him so awesome. And John just like looked up at me, and he had like a little bit of tears in his eyes, and he was like, "Mom, will you please hold to the iron rod so I can be awesome too?" I was like, "Buddy, you are awesome." But yeah, that's basically how things were. But interestingly enough, so that's why when he came out and I was like, okay, the church is not safe. That was my instant thought. It was like instant.
Did you either of you suspect it before he came out at age 13?
I didn't.
Yeah, I thought, without going too heavily down the stereotype road. I mean, there are certain things that made me suspicious. That's not the right word, but maybe just kind of wonder. But the year prior to that, kids are kids, I guess, and express themselves differently. But about a year prior, he started talking about a girl, a very specific girl, and how, like, he might want to be with her, and that kind of thing. And at that point, so for the previous year, it was unsuspecting, I guess. I was like, oh, maybe he grew out of that little thing or whatever.
Yeah, my brothers used to tease me. I don't know why, it just never crossed my mind. I just thought people are just who they are, and like, why, it doesn't matter. Like, why do we all have to fit in this manly box? But my brothers used to say, don't let him play with dolls, you're gonna make him gay, or whatever. They would just say stuff like that, obviously homophobic things. And I would be like, just because John's favorite color is pink and he likes to play with dolls and he likes to dress up like Tinkerbell doesn't mean he's gay.
No, gay's a choice.
No, that was sarcasm. People need to know that. So anyway, for me, I was like, John's just John, and I don't know. But actually, a few months before he came out, my sister's boyfriend had that they were like looking at rings and thinking about getting engaged or whatever, but he came out as gay, and I was like, that was kind of I don't know, just a moment where I could really think about that, like what that means. And I told John, they're not going to really be getting married anymore, and this is why, and he's gay, and I had never talked to John about gay people or what that means, and he just kind of leaned back in the chair and said, Mom, you know what I think is wrong with gay people? And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I taught him? I was so nervous, and I said what? And he goes, absolutely nothing. And I was like, you're right. There's like, we love Andy, and he has this super hard road, and we're going to be here for him. And I was all like, I'm praying for Andy. But I was so grateful that John that somehow he hadn't absorbed those negative messages.
And John didn't know at that time that he was gay.
Right.
Yeah.
He had no clue, as we talked about in our other podcast. But
He probably had some voice anyway. But yeah, he like literally was like, I saw two guys kissing. That makes sense to me. Why does that make sense to me? I think I might be gay. So then he Googled how to tell if you're gay, and he took a couple of quizzes, and then he talked to one of his friends, and then he talked to Andy. He actually reached out to Andy, and he kind of did a little bit of research, and then he Googled 101 ways to come out. Like, this all happened within a week. And then he played a game of Hangman with me, and that's how he came out. And he was like, wow, I think I'm gay. Yeah, I'm gay. I need to tell my mom.
Awesome. Okay, so what was your life like between that early 2013 day 2013, right? Mm-hmm. Where he comes out, and that fall affirmation? Just tell us in 1 minute kind of how that affected the family. Yeah,
it was hard. It was really, really hard. I think, to say it, in a minute, we were going at different paces. I mean, Meg was like, it's my son. It felt like, I guess it's my son of the church. And she was like, I'm all in with my son. And kind of the church was left by the wayside. And I had to go a lot slower, I guess, and like uncover every last kind of nook and cranny of the gospel, and study and every little thing. And Meg was like, that doesn't matter to me. This is all about my kid. And so that summer was really difficult. The analogy I kind of have, it's like we were basically in a boat going from point A to point B, and Meg's boat has all these holes in it, but she's just booking it down to the end to get there. And I'm like going really, really slow, and I have to like kind of patch up every single hole. And it took
stay in the boat.
Yeah, I had to fix everything and make sure everything was right, because I was like, if I'm going to, kind of leave this religion or not believe it or whatever, which I don't think is a choice anyway, but I had to make sure,
Yeah, and I'm like, what the heck is wrong with you? Catch up. I was so frustrated.
Because I'm like, it's our salvation, man.
And I was like, who cares? It's our kid. It was
That's hard.
Hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah, it was really rough, and not being on the same page for like the first time ever.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, okay, so I might have to choose here.
Yeah.
Like I was thinking, if literally John comes before everyone, and myself included. And at the time I was like, all right, buddy, if you don't catch up, like,
yeah, and
this is going to be scary. I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, and it takes years, really. I mean, we got to the really hard part of it, but it really takes years as you kind of develop a new identity. You're not who you were.
And it wasn't hard having a gay kid. That wasn't the hard part. The hard part was like what that does to your testimony, or what that does to your beliefs, and what all of a sudden, like, as soon as I walked through those church doors the first Sunday after he came out, I just like everything went dark, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just walked into the enemy territory. It felt like enemy territory instantly.
You felt the spirit the week before, and then you walk in that way. Nothing has changed except your kid's gay, and your beliefs haven't changed or anything really at that point. But you walk in there, and suddenly it feels. Yeah, I mean, it felt terrible. It felt like the worst place to be.
We both felt that because, like, we're sitting in Sacrament, and I looked at him and I was like, "We can't come back."
It shocked me.
Yeah, and he goes, "You're right."
It shocked me.
We can't come back, and that's just how we felt. I was like, I'm not going to go hang out in places that aren't safe for my kid, and it felt unsafe. And for me, I just kind of didn't realize, the gay Mormon story. I hadn't looked into it too much. I didn't think about it too much. I didn't think, I just thought, that Mormonism doesn't really work for you if you're gay, and I guess you have to leave, and that's fine. It's not for everyone. I just didn't think like hurtful and painful that would be.
Right.
Like you're faced with it, and unfortunately, that's what it took.
Yeah, I had a lot of conversations with Daniel Parkinson right at the beginning, and I was probably saying some just what I would deem now as just some terrible things, and he was so patient and so like just so great and understanding. I mean, initially I was probably, our kid comes out like, okay, and he'll be celibate, blah blah blah, and Meg's like, no way. And so it took me, I had to learn. I felt like I learned quickly, but I mean, really quickly within a week. But
I had no patience. I had no patience. I was like, catch up, buddy. Like, Anyway, sorry. That's way longer.
No, it's great. So how did you talk about what led to you being able to get a meeting with Elder Christofferson? How'd that happen?
So I had heard of Tom Christofferson, heard that there was an apostle out there that had a gay brother, and me being kind of where I was in the church. This was probably April or May, so this was, early still, and I was still like holding on, trying to everything I could to believe this faith and stay who I was. And I'd heard that he had this gay brother, and I was like, oh, that is awesome. I would love to talk to him or know him or meet him. And so, and
if I could just add, and this, I'll be talking about this, I'm not asking you to talk about it, but when I learned about Tom Christofferson, I also learned that he had a gay partner that he lived with. And so, but he was active in his ward. And so at the time, what Tom Christofferson represented was that maybe you could be gay and Mormon.
Yes.
And faithful. And so you didn't have to choose. And that's what Tom represented to me at the time.
And live a life of not being alone.
Yeah, not because my research for my dissertation showed that of all the bad decisions you could make, celibacy was actually the worst of all possible decisions. Worse than trying to change your sexual orientation. It was that bad. And so I just didn't see that as a viable option for most people. And so to find an apostle's brother that was living with a man as if they were married and faithful, I was like, he's our savior,
Same. And I had read all of your research, and I mean, I didn't sleep for like 2 weeks. So I was totally aware of the whole celibacy situation. I didn't want that for John either, but then Jake found Tom, and like you, I was like, oh, wow, that's so hopeful. And
So I interrupted. You learned about Tom. Then what happened?
I didn't know anything about you, John. You weren't on my radar, or I didn't know anything about any of that.
That's okay.
John and I were emailing within like hours of my John coming out.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah.
That was great. Yeah.
So ultimately, I kind of Facebook stalked him a little bit, and somebody had said that he's like the nicest guy on the planet, and he is. He's definitely in the top 1 or 2. And so I friended him on Facebook. He, accepted right away. Then I messaged him. I was like, hey, my name's Jake, blah, blah, blah. Just kind of gave a quick introduction. And he was just the greatest person. And we just kind of communicated back and forth through Facebook. I don't know, 3 to 4 times a week, probably, just checking in with each other fairly regularly. I kind of felt like I had this friendship quite quickly. And I was asking him tons of questions, and he was so gracious and just being so open. And I'm just this person that knows nothing. I probably said a lot of offensive things as I was starting to learn. And anyway, I felt like I made this friend very quickly. And then he told me his story a little bit, and we had started a blog when John came out, which got got about 10,000 hits in the very first day that we started, because it was our coming out letter, and it went to like PFLAG, their homepage and things like that. And so we realized, oh crap, we're gonna have to like keep this thing going, but we're both we're too lazy to kind of do it. And so anyway.
No, we were just like, what
I know,
should
and we didn't know anything.
say? And people were like asking us to say things. And we're like, who are we? We don't.
So I asked Tom if he would share his story, because he's like, I've never really told my story in print or whatever. And so he wrote up his whole story, and put it on our blog. And it was really, really cool. And they talked about, his partner of 17 years, and I'll let Tom can go into that, but ultimately we developed this friendship. And then I don't know the time frame, sometime within the next month, he messaged me, and he goes, hey, so I was talking to my brother last night, Todd, and I was like, yeah, I figured that was the brother you were talking about. And he said, we were talking about your family, like you guys came up, and Tom had told his brother, Elder Christofferson, that, told him some of our history, some of what we'd written about in our blog, about our coming out.
I shared our coming out letter.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly if Todd read our coming out letter, or if it was just shared through Tom. But the point is, Tom mentioned to me that Todd Christofferson was intrigued about how young Mormon kids were identifying as gay and being like open about it, because it wasn't really a thing, if you will. I mean, there certainly are examples, but John came out and was like, I'm gay, it's cool, there's no big deal, which was a little bit unheard of even 4 years ago. And so Todd was interested, and Tom said, and he'd love to ask you guys some questions. And that was it. And if anybody listening to this who leaves the church and still talks to people that are in the church, all you want more than anything is for people to ask you questions. You want to be understood, and I think what you get so many times is people are just telling you how you're wrong, or telling you this, that, or the other, and nobody seems to really ask. And so hearing that from an apostle, if you will, for me, it was a really, really big deal. And I was excited to have that opportunity to kind of share our thoughts or our experiences. And so that where it was set up. And then a couple months later, we found out about affirmation, and we knew we were going to go, and Tom was going to go, and his brother was going to be there. And the short of it is, Tom just sent me a message, and he's like, hey, we're all going to be in affirmation. My brother's going to be there. Do you want to meet, the day before or the day after? And we said, sure. And then he set it up.
Now, Meg, did you have any interactions with Tom before meeting with Todd? And then also, what was it like for you to find out you might be able to talk to an apostle? You weren't believing. You had lost your faith completely, right?
Yeah, like basically, in a matter of moments, within a little bit of John coming out. But
so Jake, you must have been stoked and hopeful, right?
Yeah, I kind of played with percentages. I mean, it was, as in my believing, I think at my most believing, I was in, faith is not sure knowledge, right? And so I was going down to like, okay, now I'm 80% believer, 70%, 60%, and I'm trying to hang on. And the meeting with Elder Christofferson was that last hope for me of just hanging on and hoping, and just, I've never prayed or fasted more in my entire life than I did probably the month before meeting with him, because I wanted it so badly to be true still.
That's so powerful. Now, for you, Meg, not believing anymore, that is a totally different meaning to meet with an apostle, right? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I had an agenda. I'll be honest about that. I was hopeful for Jake too, that he would get what he needed, because even though I wanted him to be on the same page with me about John, I still was supportive of him wanting to be in the church. So I kind of was keeping these secret hopes to myself that I could, like, all right, I'm gonna change things, and I'm gonna hopefully educate him just about things that I had been learning. For instance, the suicide rates in Utah, particularly the throwaway kids in Cache Valley. Just this whole situation that I saw that I felt like he could help with. So I kind of went in as an agenda. I just wanted to educate.
We didn't have any questions for him, really. We weren't.
Well, you wanted to get something from him, but you would say.
Well, yeah, I just remember thinking is, you're going to meet with an apostle, what do you ask? Right? And I'd asked other people that question, but ultimately we weren't meeting with him because we wanted to meet with him to gain insight. Like, it was for us, we went into it thinking he wants information from us.
What is it like to be a teenager? And I was thinking, he doesn't have any guidance. There's no sense of purpose. There's no, for the strength of youth for gays, or, and I what about state dances? Why, like, I want him to dance with a boy. Like, why can't he be Mormon? And if that's what he wanted, and be accepted, like, he can't even hold a boy's hand. He can't even, like, go on a date with a boy. That's just ridiculous to me how stringent it is, and the rules are for the gays. It's like, shut it all down. There's no leeway. So I just wanted to, maybe I was hopeful that I would get some sort of insight that things were changing for the better. I had no idea what was coming the years to follow with the November policy and things like that. I was thinking, things have to change. Why would an apostle want to talk to us and want to learn about what it's like to have a gay teenage boy and what that means to a family, and unless he wanted to help change it for the better. So, but I was very aware of, like, you mentioned patriarchy in the beginning, and I just thought, okay, I understand patriarchal minded men. I understand, the age disparity between us and how we may see things differently. And so I told Jake before heading into it, I was like, you do most of the talking, because if he's going to hear you, like, and again, that was maybe presumptuous of me to think that, like, he wouldn't listen to me because I'm a woman, but that's how I felt. And I just was like, so you do all the talking. And
I wanted to meet with him probably more than you did.
Yeah, you wanted this. Mm-hmm. And I was like, all right, I'll meet with an apostle. I think he's a man, but also a man with power. So yeah, I'll meet with him. But, like,
Meg, was there any small sparkling of a hope that maybe he would rekindle your testimony or tell you something? Was there any part of you that was open to rekindling your faith in the church if he said the right thing or did the right thing?
No.
You were done.
Okay. I was, and it was like Jake talked about, like, 80%, 70%, like, he gradually went down. I went from, like, 100 to 0, not 100, but, like, whatever belief I had to 0 in an instant.
Okay, you were done.
And then all of a sudden it was on. And I think I can't choose who you love, and you can't choose what you believe. And I really couldn't. I don't think there's anything he could have said that would have changed that. That wasn't on my radar.
And throughout 2013, was John still attending church, trying to attend church, partially attending? And he just stopped completely?
He stopped, but we had an interesting, in June, so just a couple months later, we were in the middle of a move. I lost my job. We were relocating to Arizona because of a new job. And so it was very easy for us to kind of cut really, I guess, really strong ties right away, because we were moving to a place so nobody knew us, and you're leaving a place, and not really sure people wanted to know us anymore. And so it was kind of easy to not go.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a 13-year-old, and I was worried. I was sitting here like terrified, like I'm going to traumatize my little Peter priesthood boy and telling him that he can't go to church anymore. Because I'm like, I'm the parent, and I get to choose what safe spaces that you are on. I'm not going to throw you. And anyway, but again, I also didn't want to traumatize him. I was feeling so conflicted about that, but I just was like, I'm just going to be open and honest with him and tell him how I saw why, as a parent, I saw that it wasn't safe anymore. And he was like, well, why? And why can't I be gay and go to church? What, there's nothing wrong with being gay. And I was like, no, you're absolutely right. And he was like, the church thinks. So I had to like educate John that there's really not a path, a plan of happiness for him like there was for us. And I told him, like, we get to choose our own path. And he actually, we had a great conversation, and he just handled it so well. And it was so healthy. And he was like, that makes sense. Okay. And then like maybe a couple weeks later, he was kind of like, actually, church is really boring. This has been great. Yeah. Now Sundays we go and we have fun. And
yeah. Okay.
And it's been great. But
so the only one with sort of faith skin in the game going into the meeting with Elder Christofferson was Jake.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So who wants to narrate the beginning of the meeting? Like what?
Well, I will say this, just and then I'll get into it. Is the month before, where I was mentioning like just fasting and praying and just trying with every last, I guess, everything I had to still believe. I was at the same time I was thinking, what do you ask? Like, to me, that was the most obvious thing. Is like, you have to ask an apostle. This is somebody that speaks to God. Like, he's got some kind of insight, right, in direct line to God. And what do you ask? And I was like, well, you don't ask a doctrinal question, because doctrinal questions, you can get the answers to pretty much anything that we're allowed to know or that's revealed. And and I was like, I didn't really want to ask I knew Meg was going to cover like the activism, like what are we going to do, what are we going to change, kind of thing. And I just went back and forth. I was like, what do you ask? And so when we got there, and I didn't know, I mean, we went to his office in Salt Lake, and we were sitting downstairs with some other people. He was meeting with several other groups that day that were attending affirmation. And we were sitting downstairs with another family, and still had no idea in my mind what I wanted to ask. And so we get on the elevator, and we're heading up there with, who did we get the elevator with? He didn't come down. Somebody brought us up the elevator, and we met him at the top. My mom was there. She came up. Yeah, and she wanted to meet him. And so I think we took a photo or something. But on the elevator, on the way up, we're standing there, and it occurred to me like what to ask. And I knew it was the question to ask. And essentially it was all about Tom's life, his brother, and the trials and stuff that he had, and compared to what our son's life might look like. And so the question ultimately that I wanted to ask him was, seeing your brother, he's been around his brother his whole life. His brother's in a very, very happy relationship with his partner, but they still had some different beliefs. And as far as, Tom still had belief in the church. There was this element of just trying to live with or reconcile, I guess, with some of the contradictory beliefs. And I saw how that it had caused some despair, some problems in their family. There were just things that I did not want for John necessarily, even though Tom was super in a great place and really happy and loved his brother. And but I knew the history of his life a little bit, and I was like, gosh, that sounds hard and difficult. And so and it was all pretty much church driven. And so the question I wanted to ask Todd Christofferson was like, can you give me a reason or some kind of sign or something of a reason that I would want to raise my son in a church, knowing that it would be a sad, a very challenging, difficult life? Because my understanding of the gospel is, he was 13 at the time, or just turned 14, I guess. But my understanding, I was like, he's really too young to be accountable. I know age of 8 is accountability, but he's really too young to be accountable if we pull him out of church, you know, and he lives a happy gay life, if you will. And I was like, you know, the doctrine is he could die and he'll have that opportunity to accept it in the next life, have his temple work done and all that, and he'll be able to enjoy all the blessings of salvation without having a absolute miserable, lonely life. And so ultimately, I was like, can you give me any kind of reason for that? You know, that it would be okay. And what I was hoping for is I wanted him to lean in and kind of say, like kind of like give a little wink or lean in and say, hey, yes, like something's coming. It's, you know, we're going to be changing. You know, it's going to be okay. And instead, he sat way back.
Okay, wait.
Yeah.
Before we actually go into the meeting.
Oh, sorry.
So where exactly did the meeting take? So again, it was October?
September, right before the day before affirmation.
September 2013, and John.
Okay, September 2013, right before affirmation. Okay. And where physically was the meeting?
His office at church.
In the administration building next to the church. So not the big, huge church office building, the administration building that's kind of next to the church office building, right?
I'm not sure.
I don't know. It was like
we were up pretty high.
It was like bomb-proof glass. Yeah, it was pretty. It was in his own personal office, so I don't know if he has multiple offices, but it felt like it was.
Okay. Normally, my understanding is the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 have offices in the administration building, which is separate from the church office building.
Yeah,
But you don't remember. It's okay.
No, he had a secretary that we met that was outside of his office. It was his secretary. So it was his like static location wherever he is.
It was very ornate though, down in the lobby. Like the water fountain was gold and there was marble everywhere. And it was but literally you just walk through this like bomb-proof glass, and then there was just a security guard. But everything in there was just so ornate and so super fancy. Like literally, the water fountain was gold.
Okay.
So it was, I don't know.
Couple blocks east of the temple, maybe.
What does that sound like? Does that sound like? Anyway, whatever.
Okay, and who was in the meeting with you besides you guys and D Todd? Did Tom come?
No.
So it's just the three of you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and anything about the way they handled you that was interesting? Name tags, I'm assuming, weight room, anything strike you about just the process of going in to meet with? Is it just like a business meeting, basically?
Yeah, with high security.
Okay, super high security.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the security guard that took us up, but like the secretary came down and got us, and then the security guard brought us up. But they didn't like pat us down or check my bag or anything. They just, it wasn't like.
I'm guessing they had a metal detector that you walked through.
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you're in the meeting. So what happens? You walk in.
Yeah. So Jake and I had discussed this ahead of time that he was going to lead the conversation, and I would just kind of chime in like the good wife that I was. But I'm not a good wife, and the second my butt hit the seat, I was like I could not shut up, and I even like was having an out of body experience, like shut up, hovering over myself. But and every time I looked at Jake, he's like, I could see it in his eyes, like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know, I can't stop.
So what types of things were you saying, Meg?
Well, I just jumped right in and started talking about the experience of a gay teenager, having no path for him, having no set of rules for a gay boy. When I went to my bishop, I just started just like word vomiting all this stuff about my experience. We went to our bishop and we were like, okay, so like, where are the other parents with gay kids? Like, can we talk to some? Is there like a support group? And I told him there was nothing. I mean, like literally nothing. He gave me the miracle of forgiveness. That's the only thing he like had to give me. And he was like, this is what I have for you. And I started reading that and I was like, I'm going to burn this book. Who gives this to people? I was so upset. And so I was telling him what it was like to be a parent of a gay teenager and and literally that's where you go to your church for guidance, or if you have anything that maybe I don't know, they had all these support meetings for like gambling addicts or something, but they didn't have anything for me, and I didn't fit the box or the mold. And so I just kind of was telling him like, that's really a challenge, and this is like something that needs to be addressed, because I was not good. I did not feel good, and at the time I only knew to go to my church for resources and support and help, and my bishop was like, I got nothing. He was so nice.
Yeah, our bishop was
Our
great,
bishop was
but he didn't
awesome.
know.
But they didn't.
You
Yeah.
could tell this was his first time.
His first rodeo.
Yeah, with this topic, yeah.
Okay. So Meg, you're just telling the full story
Mhm.
and expressing.
Just sharing experience and sharing our coming out. And I shared with him, at the time I wasn't like, I didn't know where I was on any kind of belief spectrum or spirituality. And of course, everybody's on a journey their whole life. So I don't feel like I've landed anywhere still, but I told him that I had like one of the most spiritual experiences. And if you can say that there's something, such a thing as personal revelation, I feel like I had personal revelation for my child. And I said, this is my child, and I have the gift of discernment for him. And I'm going to know what's best for him. So I shared with him this experience that I had. And that's kind of interesting. Okay, so I told him that the night John came out, I was just in my closet, and so that no one could hear me crying or whatever. And I was just like, what does this mean for him? What does this mean? And I kind of audibly said, who could deny such a soul as this? Because he's just such a good person, and he's so he's so thoughtful and so kind. And I just audibly said it kind of out loud, and I felt like I got this this feeling just wash over me, and it's just complete peace. And I felt that there was an audible reply, not I. And I told him, I said, this whole just idea opened up in my mind. Obviously I understand how the mind works, and I was probably just trying to give him a purpose through my own mind. But I felt like at the time, okay, so gay people do need partnerships, and they do need to be sealed together and ministering angels, and not everybody's meant to have like millions of babies in the eternities, and maybe that's their purpose, and
this was the night John came out.
Yeah. And so I'm here, just like my mind is giving me a purpose for him to help me fit into what this means. And so I'm telling him this, and I was like, I really feel like there's an eternal purpose for gay people, but the church just doesn't have it, or I don't know what. But he then said, well, that was a really beautiful experience, and personal revelation trumps doctrine. Or sorry. Is that when he said that? Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. Well, so I was just going on and on about like this personal revelation that I had for John, and how there can be a place for gay people in the church, and this is what I felt like was like, opened up to me.
And his response to you was what? How'd you feel, Meg?
It's okay. He just said, what a beautiful experience. And
he listened a lot.
He did listen a lot. He was taking notes, and I was like, whoa, he's taking notes. I'm just going to keep talking.
I mean, we probably spoke 85% of the time.
Okay.
I mean, we spoke a lot.
But yeah, so he was taking notes, and he just thought that was such a beautiful experience. And I just said, what do you have for me? Like, what do you have for us? I just kept asking, and and I said, so like John goes to a stake dance and he dances with a boy. Like, what does that mean? And he was just, I think, stumped, like really stumped. He was like, very much like the bishop. It was like, I don't have anything for you. And I was like, well, you need to get some stuff for me. And like, you need to get some stuff for all these kids. Like, John's not the only gay teenager in this church, and I know.
Yeah, and I think that was really the first time that Meg's, the whole Mama Dragon thing really, really came out, because she's asking these questions, and I know I'm sitting over there. I know she's not asking them for her, because I know we're never going to a stake dance again, But I know that she's speaking about all these other beautiful kids, right? That we're starting to meet and starting to hear about, and all the ones that we don't know about yet. And because
Meg, you were one of the founders of Mama Dragons.
Yeah, that's actually where the name came from, was the night John came out. I just kept like, you know, in my family, I was always teased for being the mama bear or whatever. And the night John came out, I was just like, I feel like this whole new level of protection is coming over me. Like, what's stronger than a bear? What's stronger than a bear? And I don't know, it just like happened to me. I just felt like I was growing talons and claws, and I could breathe fire. And I just started getting really worked up. And because I had a visual in my head that someone would hit John, like that was like the worst thing I could imagine, was that somebody would bully him and hit him, and what that felt like in my belly and my gut. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm capable of murder. I was just like, things just got really intense, and now I call myself a mama dragon. And so we put that in our blog post because I really wanted to like put the warning out there to my family and friends, like, hey, guess what, like I'm a mama dragon now. And I think that's just kind of where the name came from. But some other women, we started talking online, and some other women were like, oh my gosh, that just describes it. Can I call myself a mama dragon too? It just kind of grew organically from there.
Nice.
Like about 6 or 8 of us in the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jake, would Meg, you know, talk about your experiences of Meg, or kind of if you ended up sharing as well, why don't you take over the storytelling a little bit?
Yeah, so I didn't say very much, you know, especially for the first, we probably met for an hour and a half, maybe. It was long. It was a long time, might have been up to 2 hours. And yeah, Meg was definitely talking a lot. And because she's super, super passionate, you know, and she was talking about Prop 8 and these throwaway kids. She accused him of having blood on his hands for a lot of things. I'll let her talk about that, but it's pretty, that's not something that he probably maybe has never heard, you know, of being told that. And it was very poignant, you know, not aggressive, but like, hey, heads up, you know.
Yeah, I wasn't like her. Maybe I was. I don't know.
So she kind of, I'll let her get to that, but ultimately, he had asked me, and to say maybe what I was saying before is I really wanted to kind of get to this question that I had about you know, is I was looking for hope, like I said, and maybe backtracking just a hair is what I was hoping for after praying and fasting when we came out of that elevator. Like I don't know what I was expecting, but I was hoping to see him and, you know, see this aura or angels around him. I don't know what I was expecting, but I poured so much of my heart and soul into the previous month. I mean, literally had never exercised more faith probably in anything than I had in that, because I knew this was going to be a moment. This is going to save me or lose me, if you will. And like I said, I didn't know what I was expecting, but I knew something was coming. And we came out of the elevator, and we just shake his hand right there outside of his office. And I remember shaking his hand and literally thinking, like, "Yep, here's another guy." You know, it was so just I don't know, plain,
kind of anticlimactic or disappointing.
Yeah, and not disappointing, just anticlimactic, because I was looking for truth still, and so I was open to whatever it was. And people ask me about, you know, how do you leave the church? And I basically I Moroni 10, 3 through 5 my way out, which is the same way that you go in, you know, and you ask if things are true, and I'm now asking if kind of they're not true. And I felt like I had a very, very clear answer almost right going into that meeting. And so it was interesting, like, so over the course of that meeting, my testimony, which was still hanging on, went from wherever it was to almost nothing. And I came out of there at the end pretty empty. But so I did finally get to ask him the question about, I was looking for some safe passage for John, you know, in a church, and just looking for something. And when I asked him, I said, can you give us a reason or any kind of hope of why we should raise John in a church that will knowingly cause like sorrow and despair in his life? And that's when I say he like leaned back and thought about it, and he started shaking his head, and he said no. And then he said, in fact, he said raising John in this church may not be the safest place for him. And that, at the time, that was actually disappointing, because I was expecting something much grander and some kind of hope for all these other kids that we had now kind of familiarized ourselves with. And I wanted to be able to come out of there and say, hey, Elder Christofferson said, hey, this is coming. There's going to be this hope, all this stuff. And so it was much of a letdown. So, and when he said no, it was just kind of just this reality, like, okay, the church isn't safe. And I have an apostle right in front of me recognizing that. Now, he did follow up and said, I would counsel you that you stay anchored in Christ. And so he kind of always has that to come back to, you know, so try to, and I don't think he knew where we were at believing.
Do you remember what I said?
No.
Why?
No.
Why?
Yeah.
Why anchor in Christ, you said?
Why? You know, what does that have to offer? Like, what is,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just wanted to, I really think I might have thrown him for a loop, but yeah, I just said, why, you know, and I was like, nothing against Christ. I think that he would, I think historical Jesus was a super awesome dude and he was all about love. And I actually might have said these words. I don't know. I think I did. I was just, but I said, but why? And he didn't have,
Yeah, he said something, but
he was like, you know, because so he will be a good person. And I was like, well, he'll be a good person. Don't worry about that. Like he's a good person. I think that comes from within.
Yeah. So his counsel, though, ultimately, the biggest takeaway was, to me, was which it took me a couple of days to have this sink in, but to me, he was saying he realized that the church isn't awesome for gay youth. You know, it's not a safe place, and we use the term safe. You know, and by him counseling us to stay anchored in Christ and in the gospel, you know, it's like it's safe for gay kids' parents, but not for their kid.
Yeah, he was saying if we stayed anchored in the gospel in Christ, then John will stay on the same path. And I kind of took offense to that because because I know a lot of, you know, beautiful people that don't believe in Christ and they have beautiful children and they are completely capable of following an internal moral compass. And you know, so I was like, so John's only going to be okay and be a good person if I stay anchored in the gospel. Like that doesn't make sense to me. And I that's why I just challenged him on that.
It's very similar to the meeting that Trevor Haugen had with Don Clark, Elder Don Clark, who basically said, good luck raising kids outside of Mormonism, because if you think it's bad in Mormonism, it's really bad outside of Mormonism. And Mormonism is the only chance you really have of raising healthy, moral kids. And it sounds like that's a tool in their tool bag that they pull out regularly.
Yeah, and I'm going to yes and no with that, John. I mean, because he did recognize that the church still wasn't safe for him. You know, so
Sure.
I hear what you're saying, but he didn't give an alternative saying outside of the church will be better. He recognized the problems.
If we stay, like, yeah, that's fine. John can leave, but you have to stay, so John will still be good. And it's kind of along those lines of that testimony where it was like, my mom held so tight to the iron rods, and that makes me awesome, and that made me awesome, you know. And then John had this fear that if I let go of the iron rod, that he wouldn't be awesome. It's a weird narrative, thinking about that now. But totally. Yeah, I just was like, I take offense to that. That offended me.
Sure.
I don't know why.
So Meg, what talk about the part where you said you told him he had blood on his hands. You didn't mention that in your, so talk about that.
Yeah, okay. So, so I was telling him, kind of giving him some statistics. At the time, and I'm trying to think of what it was at the time. I had, before I went into the meeting, I wanted to be armed with information. So I had been in contact with Marian Edmonds, who was the kind of CEO of Outreach in Ogden, Utah. And she was on the ground, you know, boots on the ground, dealing with the homelessness, teen homelessness, and the way the laws were at the time, you couldn't house a homeless teen. That there were like kidnapping charges and things like that. Like they couldn't even go to a homeless shelter. So all she could provide them was a tent, And like the most requested item was a plank of wood, so they weren't sleeping on the frozen ground, because they were in an undisclosed location in the mountains in Cache Valley. And there were like 1,200 kids there. It wasn't like a few. There were like 1,200 homeless teenagers. I had never heard of such a thing. And they called themselves the throwaway kids. And so I'm telling him these things. And I started saying how this related to Mormonism, you know, from the information that I had from Marion.
And he'd never heard of this.
Yeah, this was news to him. So I was giving him this information of, you know, how many hours a kid outside of the church had to get to safety before they turned to prostitution or sex trafficking or whatever, you know, just to stay alive and eat. And it was like 72 hours. At the time, it was like Mormon kids, because they're so naive or something, just didn't have street smarts. It was 12 hours. And your Mormon parents just kicked you out. And who are you going to go to? You know, somebody in your ward, friends. It just, and dealing with that internal shame. Again, I can make up stories about this and what I can imagine that would be like. But this is the experience. This is what happens. These are the numbers that I was given, and I was told several stories of these kids. So I was sharing this information with him, and saying, as Mormons, we can do better. We have to do better. We have to take care of our kids. And so I was sharing this with him, and he kind of looked at me and he's like, "That's so sad." And I was like, I go, "Isn't it?" I said, "Don't you realize you have the power to change this? Don't you realize that?" Sorry.
Yeah, no. We've been married 17 years at that time, and I had never seen this Meg before in this moment.
Really?
I mean, it was intense. Keep going, but I'm just for emphasis. I was standing back going, "Wow, holy fetch," because that's what I said then. I said, "You go."
I just leaned into it. Like, I leaned in, and I was like, "You have the power to change this." And I might have come off a little aggressive, and I recognize that. But at the time, I was just like, "Oh my gosh!" And it just felt like, "Oh, that's so sad." Wow, really? It is sad. This is so sad. And I said, "You have the power to change this. You have the power to change this. I don't. He doesn't. You do." And I said, "If you do nothing, you have blood on your hands. In fact, they're already dripping." And he kind of sat back again. Every time I spoke, I felt like he leaned back, like, "What? Get out of my office. Who are you?" But he was really nice and really kind. And so I tried to kind of like soften the blow a little bit. What I just said, I realized what I did, and I sat back and I was like, "Well, like, we all have blood on our hands. Like, we all contributed to this. But now, like, what are we going to do about it? How can I help?" So it's not as bad as you're saying.
No, it was good.
But maybe that's the only time somebody has said that to him. Maybe, I don't know. I think that they are a little bit isolated in a bubble. They have lawyers and PR that are out kind of in the public and talking to the public. And yeah, I didn't know I could have been excommunicated on the spot for that. But yeah, that happened, and he just kind of like was quiet for a minute, and, you know, kind of furrowed his brow and started taking some notes. And I challenged him again, like, "No, really, you could say something. You could say something at general conference over the pulpit, just something. You don't have to change doctrine, but like, what can we do to help these kids?"
Yeah, I remember talking. I was like, for however many years, we have heard marriages between a man and a woman. And if you did not know as a Mormon that Mormons believe that marriages between a man and a woman, you weren't a Mormon, right? I was like, can we talk about something different? It's like just something positive. We don't have to step away from that doctrine, but just, you know, something kind of like what Uchtdorf has said since, you know, as far as there is a place for you. I mean, some of the verbiage has changed a little bit, which has been good, but like that was really never a thing that was said from the pulpit. It was just, you know, rule with iron fist, kind of man, woman. And it was like, well, there are gay people. Like, you're literally, like, in this conversation, you're recognizing that their path is different. And we did talk a little bit about the afterlife, you know, and what that meant for gay people as well. And you know, there is no plan. There is no written out plan.
Yeah, he did say, talked about like the narrative of this life as a test and that everything's going to be made whole in the afterlife. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? Because I don't think my kid wants to just like be made straight when he dies. Like that's, and then I said, and that kind of narrative also contributes to suicidal ideation or thoughts, because these kids are literally dying to be made whole.
And he did confirm, I mean, he didn't, I guess, admit or deny that kind of, when people talk about the narrative of the church, the only way that this plan of salvation works for a gay person, it's just kind of logical deduction, is that for so many years, it was like, oh yeah, well, they'll just be made straight, and then this gay man will be straight, and he'll be given a woman or whatever, and all, I think that's what people thought made whole meant. And I mentioned that to him, I said, no gay person wants to hear that. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I know as a straight person, I certainly want to hear the same thing. I don't know that for sure. But as a straight person, I know that I wouldn't want to be told, oh, you're going to be gay in the next life, and that's going to be your happiness. So I just kind of assumed that can't be a very pleasant doctrine to be taught. And I don't know if it's actually, you may know this, I don't know if it's actually written anywhere specifically as doctrine, but I did mention it to him. We just kind of grazed over it, that it was a not popular idea.
But he was surprised at that. He was surprised at that. He was like, oh, because he thought that was giving them hope. I think we were just coming from two different places, like completely two different places. How what we saw was harmful, he actually thought was hopeful and was being kind to gay people and loving. So his idea of loving gay people just was a different way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So did he offer anything satisfactory or useful in that conversation?
Yeah, and that's probably and this is probably the other main thing that we talked about. That was probably my favorite takeaway, if you will, from it. And I know he met with other people that day, and in most of those conversations, I know he met with somebody a gay man that is married to another man and had been for a long time, was excommunicated, and I know they were talking about how their relationship was, with their relationship with God, that they knew that they were okay, and but the church says that they're not okay, and how that's kind of conflicting, and some of the other conversations that we heard through that day all kind of had the same narrative a little bit. In affirmation, I mean, Daniel Parkinson did a whole piece on this about your relationship with God, and as a gay person, and feeling that your relationship with somebody else of the same sex is okay with God, and how that kind of fits, and how it affects you. And so we talked about that idea a little bit, and we're asking him, I was like, how do you explain that? Or how do you explain somebody? I mean, are they deceived? Are they praying to God about their gay relationship and they're deceived at their answer, because their church is telling them something opposite? And this is where he said, he's like, no, they're not deceived. This is where, personal revelation will trump church doctrine every time. And that makes sense to me, but then he backed it up, just like you're supposed to. If anybody's learned anything about teaching, you're supposed to back everything up with scripture, which he did. He said, you look at Nephi and Laban, you're not supposed to murder. Nephi was commanded to kill Laban. And that's an example of a personal revelation trumping church doctrine. And
wow.
And then he went on, and this is the thing that really aggravated me much later as it kind of set in. He said, but we can't teach this from the pulpit. We can't teach this from the masses, because this is a church of order, and we can't be in a church of chaos. And I, at the time, I remember I was like, well, that makes sense. If you just say everybody can do whatever they feel they want, then it no longer becomes an institution. It just becomes kind of a free-for-all. But I also remember thinking how important it is that all the gay people realize that this is doctrine, that you're telling me right now. You're saying this personal revelation trumps church doctrine. And I cannot imagine how many lives that one line from an apostle or prophet would save, because people, that message certainly isn't out there. And like I said, it's backed up by scripture, in the Book of Mormon. And so you can't even, how do you deny it? And so that was my biggest takeaway from the whole meeting. So.
Did you feel relief almost about that? Like, okay, I can follow my heart. I can leave the church. I can be, like, did it make you feel relief?
No, I was kind of angry, but we're also telling, this is my deconversion story that we're telling, John, at the same time. So I literally came out of here at the end and was like, that's it. This is over.
What? So you left your testimony, what happened?
I left it there in the room. I mean,
okay.
All of it.
I was like, are you okay? I was pretty mad, and I was disappointed, and I was hoping, like, I honestly did go in thinking there's hope. Like, he's gonna maybe share with me that there's some sort of something coming for gay people. But I was like more.
I was distraught. I mean,
I was more concerned for you. But yeah, obviously I wasn't.
But no, the comment that he made though made me mad that it was because I'd been learning about some of the history about the church through LDS sources, even that I just didn't know, and I was just shocked at the transparency, like we talked about earlier. I was like, oh my gosh! I was like, if I had been taught this story as a primary kid, I could have believed that. Joseph Smith, in the hat, you don't ever hear about that, as the primary. I was like, I could have believed that as much as I could have believed behind a cloth and gold plates or whatever. I was like, why would you not tell the whole story? And so this was just kind of more, it was just consistent, just reaffirming that kind of method of teaching, if you will. It's like, we're going to hold some of the important truths to people because I don't know, for whatever the motivation is behind not sharing the complete truth. And so that was making me mad because that's where I was in my investigation process a little bit. And that was just kind of the last straw. And I didn't have my spiritual experience that I was like just yearning for, right at the beginning. And it just kind of got worse throughout the meeting.
So the most disappointing parts for you, Jake, were, just summarize.
One, that when I met him, he didn't have angels around him. I don't know how else to say.
All right.
And then just simply the stuff that he was saying to us are things that I felt like they couldn't teach publicly. And since then, well, I guess.
So it felt duplicitous that they were holding things back, basically?
Absolutely. Because he's saying things to us in that meeting that they would never say, but need so desperately to be said. And it would save the one sheep, if you will, but it would confuse a lot of the other, I think, mainstream members because it's inconsistent with a lot of other things. And
when so much is at stake, you're like, that we can't afford to be hiding some of the information, playing games. You're like, that we need to be fully honest and open, regardless of the consequences, right? Okay. Anything else, Jake, about what was disappointing for you in your faith?
No, not really.
Okay. Meg, how about you? What were your reactions overall?
I think kind of like what you just said, there was so much on the line. Just even not even the fact that he didn't get it, and there were some experiences that he shared with me because I'm like, I'm going in talking to a guy with a gay brother, he's totally going to get this, but he didn't, and that was disappointing.
There's things that he did and then things that he didn't. I'd probably say. I mean, there's things I assumed that he probably would get and he did, but there's a lot of things that were just kind of like
shocking.
Huh. Like if I can, we talked about Prop 8 a little bit, and I forgot. There was a moment we were talking about Prop 8, and he leaned back in his chair and like looked at the ceiling and was like, that just didn't really go how we thought it was going to go. That, and I remember even then looking at Meg, I'm like, duh, I was like, how did you not think that? That to me showed that, you're not getting it. But admittedly, I mean, 6 months earlier, I didn't get it, although I didn't have a relative that was gay that I knew of. I didn't have any interaction, like none.
Right.
So.
Meg, any other reactions?
Yeah, just for me, I just was so disheartened because, obviously I was at the church, but I wanted to kind of help make it better if I could, and not just like going to the extremes of suicide, because you put these numbers out on suicide and it just feels a little overwhelming, and maybe it's not as personal, but even just quality of life, companionship, happiness, just wanted some hope. And also I was kind of hopeful to have something to say to my brothers and sisters who are TBM, and just kind of tell them like, hey, an apostle just like told me this, isn't this so cool? Like, don't worry about your nephew's salvation or me or whatever, but so I actually didn't realize how hopeful I was until I was so disappointed walking out. And
and I can add, there's something else that just popped in my head, something else just interesting that he said as he was kind of close to the end. He spoke a lot more, and something that he said, we were talking about quality of life, we were talking about the path of a gay person in the church and things like that, and we're talking about marriage. And of course this was definitely before marriage equality, and he recognized that gay marriage, if you will, was probably going to be legal, at some point. And at that point, I think we all knew that was coming. We just didn't know how soon. And then he mentioned, he goes, but I don't think it will ever be happen in the temple. And he took a pause, and again, kind of looked at the ceiling. It's like his thinking face looked at the ceiling and was like, it's the core of the gospel and of this religion, of everything, is man, woman, is offspring. It's ultimately becoming like God and repeating this whole thing, and that only works in the male female family unit. And that this is what he was saying. He didn't say no, but it just in his mind he recognized, he was like, I just can't even think of a way of how that would ever work. So two things there. It's one, I was like, oh, so he's open to it. Because he didn't say no, but he just couldn't through his mind he wasn't creative enough, I guess, to think of a way that it could fit. So that was actually an encouraging thing and a discouraging thing at the same time. But interesting.
Okay, well, there are some, when I think about an Orthodox Mormon view, I have just some concerns about just this whole thing. And instead of editorializing it first, maybe I'll ask you the questions as a devil's advocate and have you respond. Okay? Is that okay? And then if I feel like I need to editorialize, I'll jump in. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So for you, Jake, you said one of the reasons why you were frustrated was because you didn't see angels. And so what if I were to say to you, what if someone was to say to you, well, you had unfair expectations. These are just men. They don't claim to be anything more than men. And you were wrong to expect more of them than just that they're nice religious executives. What would you say? Would you say anything in your defense for having that expectation?
So it was the reason I have that expectation, and I say angels as just kind of a term to throw out there, but I was definitely expecting a spiritual experience at some level, right? Some kind of confirmation. And the reason I say that is I can go back to my life, and there are 4 very, very significant events in my life that I have prayed so earnestly over and fasted the whole kind of works, and like over time put in the mental, the spiritual energy, looking for an answer. And these 4 scenarios, like I had a spiritual moment, with each one, and it was a confirmation of the thing that I was searching for. And so I think having a similar expectation based on my relationship with God at that point was very, very reasonable, and it was based on history and experience. And no, I didn't expect to see angels, but I did expect to see some sort of have some sort of like spiritual experience. And knowing that this was that this was like the last straw a little bit, and like it wasn't an ultimatum, but it was I had been trying so hard the last 6 months leading up to that to believe and stay, despite everything that I had kind of learned and read. I was like, this is it. I mean, this is my moment. And it wasn't almost like it was like I just met, like I would meet somebody else on the street, say, oh, here's some guy. It was almost the opposite. It was almost a display of like, this is so normal and plain that it was almost the answer that I didn't want. It was like an emphasis on normal.
But that's a fair question though.
Absolutely.
Because like I heard all the stories of like, if you see a spirit, you ask them to shake your hand. If they shake your hand, then I can't remember what the narrative is.
Right. That's in the Doctrine and Covenants, rules about when you see an angel, how to tell if it's a real angel versus an imposter or Satan's angel.
Yeah. So angels are real. So that would in that mindset, in that narrative. So like, I think it would be reasonable for Jake to think that he could actually see angels.
Joseph saw angels, right? The 3 witnesses, the 8 witnesses.
Playing warriors hang out in the church building and like guard their offices or something.
We're getting off though. I definitely didn't expect to see angels, as you said.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I expected a consistent communication relationship that I'd already had with God.
Are there teachings about apostles that would prime me to think they would be more spiritual than just your average person or member? Any teachings about what an apostle is or isn't?
I don't know. It's cultural for sure.
No, we're taught that, I'm sorry, I'm answering my own question. We're taught that apostles are special witnesses of Christ. And what they lead us to believe is that they have seen Christ themselves. And so if they're able to talk with Christ, if they're among the most righteous men on the planet, you think that would make a difference, that would give them insight, right? And if they're, I'm sorry, I'm just going to answer the question. So if they're prophets, seers, and revelators, what does that imply? It implies that they prophesy, that they see the future ahead of time, and they anticipate the future, right? They see things that we can't see. They prophesy and they reveal things to sort of give us an advantage as their followers versus everybody else out there in other false religions that don't have leaders that speak with God. And so, instead of them learning about this beforehand and leading with God's will, the way it's going on is Tom Christofferson's like, I'm gay and my brother's a little bit clueless. So let me pull together a bunch of people and try and educate my brother because the church is totally backwards and screwed up on this, right? And that's, on the one hand, someone would say, well, you're expecting too much. They're just men. They're doing the best they can. And of course, they're going to learn from the general membership. And of course, they're going to learn through their gay relatives. And that's just realistic versus having unrealistic expectations of your leaders. On the flip side, what the crap is the use of a prophet, seer, and revelator if the members have to teach them and tell them suicide statistics and quote Marion Edmonds or whoever, or Caitlin Ryan, basically quote social scientists to educate the prophets so the prophets can get informed enough to implement policies that won't kill more kids. So sorry, that's my rant because I'm impatient.
Exactly. That's kind of interesting that you said that you say that, because that's like one of the last things I said. I was like, well, you talked to Jesus, right? So can you ask him about this?
Yeah.
What'd he say?
Yeah.
What'd he say?
It's rhetorical.
Well, he just kind of went like this. He just kind of nodded his head and smiled. Like, again, he was so polite, but I'm not sure he was fully prepared for me, and for me being so direct. And interestingly enough, and I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but his next talk at General Conference was that angry feminist talk, like a month later, and I was like, hey. Yeah. So rude. But yeah, I did say that to him, and I wasn't being sarcastic, but okay, I wouldn't say sarcasm, but like, I knew he didn't talk to Christ, but I was like, hey, guess what? Like, you talk to Jesus. Can you figure this out? Can you ask? Because right now you're just saying that we have nothing, but like, when can we get something? But yeah, he just kind of was like,
yeah, and in his defense, we were about his 7th or 8th hour that day of meeting with people.
you know what though? Something that was different.
But we were harder. I think we were harder than everybody else.
Yeah, I shouldn't have left us to the end. I feel bad for him. But you know, when Jake was talking, he was like leaning in and oh, that's so interesting. He said that to you like 25 times. Oh, that's so interesting. And every time I spoke, he just was like, oh, aren't you something?
Cute little woman speaking. No, Margie had that experience with my stake president. He literally never asked us her a question. He was fine with her never saying anything the whole hour and a half that we were there.
Thank you. That must be some sort of weird cultural thing, because I felt like Jake always listened to me, you know, and I don't know, I didn't feel like patriarchy was a huge thing, you know, in our family. I would always say like, you know, Jake, call on someone to say the prayer or whatever, you know, we definitely lived it, but I that was kind of my first encounter with that, where I was like looking, I don't know, maybe I had just woken up to it, but I was looking around like I have things to say, like everything you say is interesting, but yeah, I can relate to Marky there.
So what was it like, fast forward a couple of years to the November 2015 policy, not only to learn about that policy, but also to see him as the church's front man justifying the policy? Do either of you want to take a stab at what your reactions were when you saw that he was the spokesperson for the November 2015 policy, declaring same-sex marriage an act of apostasy and stating that the children of same-sex married couples could not get baptized or become members until the age of 18 if they only denounced their parents' marriage before they joined? Either of you want to take that?
Yeah, I can hear Meg breathing right now. We're having the same visceral reaction. I can tell even when you're talking about it. It was so bad, and I don't know. I mean, it felt so bad and so betraying, and it felt total, you know, wolf in sheep's clothing kind of thing. And
that he's a wolf in sheep's clothing?
Yeah.
How?
Well, because
in terms of like kindness or charity, you're saying?
Well, because I felt like he was the guy. He was like our guy. He was the person that, like, our line of communication with the church. And I say our, I mean the whole LGBT Mormon community, right? And the church used him. This is what it felt like. It's like the church used him to just kind of stick it to us, and he said okay, you know, and it left me believing, I'm like, okay, either he's just giving us lip service. I mean, this is my two I don't know, two summations. It's either was just giving all of these people lip services that he meets with, you know, every year at affirmation. I don't know if he still does. You know, the stuff that he said to us was so helpful towards gay people, yet he's going to be the one that delivers the most crushing news. And, you know, I was like, this is like, it's almost like the worst way to deliver it. I mean, he was a wolf. I mean, and in the guise of like our friend, and it just, I don't know, it felt so hurt. It was mad.
We had been out of the church for a couple of years, but I was so shocked how that affected me, because I know the ripple effect that's going to happen after that. Every time they have a general conference, every time they speak at all, there's like this ripple effect within the LGBT community, within the activist community that I work in, that we're going to have to like clean this up. I'm tired of cleaning up your messes. Like, stop speaking. Just stop. Just stop. Like, stop saying things. And I was just so upset. And sure enough, like,
more blood on his hands.
Yeah, all hell broke loose after that policy. And we're sitting here asking for more inclusion, for more love, just messages of love. That's it. Like, no ultimatums, no, like, just love. Like, what's that gonna hurt? And I was so betrayed and so mad. I was so shocked. I was like, okay, I'm kind of removing myself from all of this. And I was hurt. I was just like, I was sobbing. I'm gone. I'm out of the church. Like, a couple years. And even my son, he was hurt. He was irate. He was really mad. And yeah, it's just hurtful. It's just hurtful.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I even like called one of my very believing sister-in-laws, and I was like, that's it. How can they do this? We're just like, I don't even know why I called her. I just called and I just unloaded on her, and I was so upset. I was so mad. I was like, what is the point of this?
Did you guys feel vindicated in your decision to leave the church?
Like how so?
Did the 2015 decision help you feel reassured that you had made the right decision?
No.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
I was
think of it that way. You're gonna be like, yeah, I'm glad I'm not part of that. I'm gonna actually make it official now,
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
I was already sure. I mean, that didn't make me any more sure. I felt like I was sure as I was gonna be.
Okay.
But I mean, it just made me, yeah.
Yeah, come to think of it, I'm like actually surprised I didn't get excommunicated, but
I think you have to go. But,
maybe because I'm a woman. I don't know.
So we're talking about after the fact, right? And then one of the most frustrating things, and one of two reasons that we probably not more open about this conversation that we've had is anytime I would talk about this to any of our still believing Mormon friends, on Facebook or whatever. I don't really write about it, but I'll definitely share it in like private messages and things like that. I intentionally don't go super public. And like people don't believe us, and they're like, you misunderstood this, or because he would never say this, and oh my gosh, and I feel like from 30 minutes out of that meeting, I feel like I've been talking about it to people that I know, and retold these stories so many times that I was like, I feel like we got it, and in the meeting we were like clarifying, things and re-asking and phrasing things in such a way. So I was like, like the personal revelation comment, you can't misunderstand that when it's backed up with scripture. And
yeah.
But people are left to either you misunderstood, or you're anti-Mormon trying to bring the church down by sharing this.
Right. Yeah.
And it's the most frustrating thing.
Like if we can't make the church safer for gay people, marginalized people, even people that feel whatever, then let's get them out. Like I would like to create safe pathways for gay people to get out of the church. Just anything that might be unhealthy. But like I really after that policy, I was like, whoa, like the gauntlet has been thrown. This is not safe, and it is. I'm like, extra not safe. How can it possibly get worse? Oh, well, this is how. Let's like punish their children. But that's totally something Jesus would do.
I had an argument at work for a month with a Mormon friend of mine who didn't believe that the policy was a thing. He's like, church wouldn't do that. That's a fake. Said, that you had written it, all kinds of stuff, that and leaked it, and and it wasn't until Elder Christofferson's clarification or explanation came out that he kind of finally believed that it was legit. And I was like, and like that didn't matter because of the previous month it mattered a lot.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating.
Just to validate you guys with my own experience, I met with Elder Holland twice, Elder Jeff Holland, and two things very similar. I was concerned about, in my second meeting with him, I was concerned about mixed faith marriages that would end in divorce when one believed and one didn't. And I asked him for something very similar. I said, do you think that losing your faith should be grounds for a divorce? And he's like, no. And I said, well, can you say that in a general conference so that believers won't divorce their non-believing spouses? And he literally said, someday we may be more mature of a church where we'll be able to make a statement like that. But right now we're not at a place where we can say something like that. And I just thought, really? Like you're worried about politics or whatever, and that's going to keep you from trying to save some marriages? But that's exactly what he said. The only other thing, the kind of the wolf in sheep's clothing thing, is that I asked him if he wanted people like me in the church that maybe couldn't believe the Book of Mormon was historical, or maybe didn't believe the Book of Abraham was historical, but still valued the cultural aspects of the church. And he was so insistent that he wanted people like us in the church. And the very next general conference was the Book of Mormon talk that he gave. And I'm like, there's no way, you're lying, because if you wanted people like me in the church, you would have never given that talk. Because that Book of Mormon talk about crawling, if you leave the church, you have to crawl over or around or under the Book of Mormon, was such a demeaning, insulting thing. I just realized these apostles tell you what you want to hear in private. That's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like ultimately Mormons gonna Mormon, they're gonna be so kind, and I that policy is awful, and I understand that suicide is complex. I understand that there's variables, but if we can like do something to maybe alleviate that, and like maybe acknowledge the higher rate of suicide in the gay community and the Mormon church specifically, and like why Utah is so high up there, why we get these spikes after the apostles speak or whatever. Like if we can just acknowledge, like start at a basic and try to take maybe one thing off the plate of somebody who has suicidal thoughts or suicidal tendencies or even has attempted it. And a narrative that I hear from a lot of my gay friends who specifically have survived suicide, that was such a contributing factor, was the narrative that they're hearing from the church. Like, why, again with you, why wouldn't we want to save marriages? And here I'm saying here, why if you know that you can potentially save a life or take that piece of it off the table, like why wouldn't we do this? Why? It's really,
don't kick your kid out from your house if he tells you he's gay. Say that that doesn't contradict any doctrine, anything at all, but I don't know why we can't say that, because people are still doing it.
Or don't reject your gay and lesbian children, period.
Or family members.
Sure.
Or
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
It's frustrating. It's just really frustrating.
Well, as we kind of bring this interview to the close, I'm going to sort of summarize. This is the third interview we've done. I'm going to ask you guys to prepare kind of closing statements. Jake, we'll have you go first, and then Meg to close. But I'm just going to say what I'm learning so far from my discussions with people who have met with general authorities is they're amongst the least educated on any given issue, whether it's church history or LGBT stuff or mixed faith marriages. They aren't aware of what's going on. They consider themselves managers, so they don't even necessarily consider themselves as responsible for becoming highly educated. They rely on other people to be the experts, and they're kind and they're gracious, but they don't always end up, their words and graciousness don't match their behavior outside of those meetings, and they're often willing to tell a different thing privately than what they're willing to admit publicly. And in all those instances, it comes across more as a bureaucrat or a politician than it does a disciple of Christ. That's what I'm gathering from the people that I've talked to so far. Jake, what would you like to say in closing?
I'll second that for sure. I think your example with Elder Holland is perfect, and I love that you shared that. It's such a good, because I have very, very close friends and family members who are dealing with that right now, and would love to hear that from the pulpit, so their marriages can be safe. And so I guess my biggest takeaway for me personally, to other than what you just said, is I guess there needs to be like a I'm off. I can't think of how to say this. Do you know what you want to say? He can edit and fix this later.
I don't know. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I was listening to what you were saying so much, John, that
No, it's okay. Any final just closing thoughts, suggestions, perspective? Now that you're through this, are you happy? Are you not? Like, what
okay.
just closing thoughts would you want to share with the audience?
So I think one of my biggest takeaways, the second what you've obviously said as well, is that for me personally, as far back as I can remember, I've always been a seeker of truth, if you will. I think the Mormonism in me as a very young kid has always taught me to look for truth in so many things. Meg knows this. I tend to be fairly diplomatic and fairly try to see other people's sides of every scenario. And in leaving the church, I felt like I found more truth. I learned that the church wasn't true, so thus I'm going to leave it. I found that the things that Elder Christopherson said to me, true or not, there are certainly things that he did say, and so I'm going to repeat them and share that out there. I mean, these are things that he said that people need to hear, and so I guess just ultimately is the biggest frustration is as either believing people or not believing members is being open to everything, right? And being open to, I love that you're doing this podcast so you can hear a lot of different stories, and stories is probably one of the best ways for truth to be kind of spread, because you'd love to kind of make up your own mind, but just to stay open to everything that's happened and look at it and be able to step back and look at it and realize that it is exactly what you said. I feel pretty confident that they're either lying for the pulpit or they're lying in these personal private meetings, because they certainly are not saying the same thing. And yeah, it's a bit frustrating, and I hope people are open to that, open to looking kind of deeper into making that decision on their own.
Thank you, Jake. Meg, you get the last word.
All right. I think that some people, might say, I might come across as like angry or belligerent, or however I might come across. I don't know, but am I angry? Yeah, I'm really angry. I'm frustrated. I'm tired. I think Natasha Parker said this perfectly about compassion fatigue. And because you're in the trenches and you see the devastation and you're calling out for help and no help is coming, and it is frustrating. And what kind of psychopath would I be to be like, because people are like, just leave it alone. Just why you can leave the church, but you can't leave it alone. And that, like, I don't understand what kind of sociopath I would have to be to just see my people that I feel are, I'm hurt and devastated and feel like that I'm not going to help, or I'm not going to try to help or do something about this. And so I don't want to just come across as like angry and spiteful. I really still, everything I do is to try to help kids like my son and my friends, and whatever I can do to lend a helping hand, I still want to do. But am I after am I angry? Yeah, I'm angry. But about this particular topic, about the subject, yes, it's personal. It's a very personal, it affects my life personally, and it still affects my son's life personally. But as far as the rest of my life, and as far as the rest of, figuring out our own journeys and going, I'm sorry, I don't mean to ramble on, but there's happiness outside of the church, and you can find it, and you can find your own path, and that's been, I guess that's been like hard and challenging, but also really liberating and exciting. We've gone through some hard things. Life is still life, and I'm trying to say, sorry, I went off track there. But anyway, I'm here. But if the apostles would just maybe get out of the way, I feel like they're doing so much more harm than good. With the LGBT community, with people that are maybe don't believe the literal historicity of the church, it just feels more harm than good is being done. And if we can please just do good, why can't?
And if you can't do good, just be quiet, right?
Yes, thank you. Like if you can't just like help or do something about it, like shut up and get out of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we need people like you, John. We really appreciate having a platform to be able to share all the stories. And I mean, Meg, you know, we go back to talk about Mama Dragons, and what people don't know, there's like a Dragon Dad group as well. That's on Facebook. That's you know, we've got 60 to 100 members or so, but it's there are places to go for support, you know, and you know, go seek after it, go find it.
Beautiful. All right, Meg and Jake Abhau, it's such a pleasure to have you return to Mormon Stories. I know that it's difficult to talk about these types of meetings, especially when you have friendships, you know, that are tied to it. But I know my listenership are grateful that you would be willing to talk about these things, because I don't think things get better unless people talk openly. And I think sunshine is the best antiseptic, as they say. So thanks to you both for being willing to come on and tell your story.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, John.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And please feel free to comment at mormonstories.org. For those of you who don't know, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Everything we do is because people donate and support the foundation. We're transparent with our finances. Everything's tax deductible. So if you want to see more programming like this continue, please consider a monthly donation to mormonstories.org. And we'll keep trying to help as many people as we can find happiness, health, and joy, either in or out of Mormonism, either one. So thanks to everyone who supports us. Meg and Jake, love you guys. Please take care, all right?
Hey, John.
Okay, thanks.
All right, stay in touch.
Okay, bye.